Welcome to this week's edition of World Crisis Radio. This is Webster Tarpley speaking to you from Washington, D.C. And today we need to talk about the nationalization of British petroleum, that the federal government must seize and nationalize a corporation which has shown itself to be incorrigible, incompetent, antithetical to the public interest, and actually has to be seized because the entire assets of BP North America have to go under escrow, in effect. They have to be held as surety for the tremendous liabilities which BP has incurred by their reckless and irresponsible cost-cutting behavior, and their pattern of that going back many, many years and many hundreds of incidents. So that if this is not done, the only alternative is that this company will be destroyed. They will be destroyed by lawsuits, boycotts, and so forth. And this is not desirable. So I think we're going to argue today for a policy of nationalizing BP, thoroughly re-regulating the entire industry, but then dropping this moratorium, so-called, on offshore drilling. In other words, economic life production must be restored. So you need a combination of economic measures and administrative measures to allow the resumption of oil production under thoroughly regulated, aggressively regulated auspices, at the same time that the example of BP puts the true fear of God into the corporate predators and their Wall Street owners. So I think that's the answer for BP. We will be looking at the pathetic case of the reactionary ideologue Joe Barton, who has now shown what most Republicans believe, that the federal government is always wrong and the private predators are always right. This is the neo-feudal or right-wing anarchist mentality, and we will go through that. And perhaps today, looming in the background, there is a giant that we want to recall today, and that is French President Charles de Gaulle. General de Gaulle, and this is the anniversary of his famous statement from London on June 18th, 1940, that would be 70 years ago today, in which he called on the French to resist Nazi occupation and to join and rally to his Free French movement, which was then instrumental in liberating the country. And what we want to do today is to celebrate de Gaulle as an economist. Our tribute to de Gaulle will be, among all the themes that we could have chosen, de Gaulle, one of the greatest economists of the 20th century, and we cite this example for the greater discomfiture of the Austrian school ideologues, right-wing anarchists, neo-feudalists, and others. So nationalize BP, and while you're doing that, nationalize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, or better yet, in this case, re-nationalize Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. Now, this comes, first of all, from the Tony Hayward hearings this past week. Tony Hayward, grilled by the House committees. We're always looking these days for a new version of the Pecora committee hearings of 1933, 1934, where the arrogance and the incompetence, the duplicity, the mendacity of ruling class elitists were put on display back in 1933, 1934. In those days, it led to the creation of the Securities and Exchange Commission as a watchdog to police Wall Street. And in the beginning, under the auspices of Joe Kennedy, whatever else we can say about him, he was an aggressive regulator because he knew all the tricks. He was intimately familiar with all the stock jobbing practices of the bubble, the 28, 29 stock market bubble, and then, of course, how the various finance oligarchs tried to restart the bubble under the conditions of the Depression. But notice the words of the chairman of BP. When he came out of the White House, he talked about the touching concern of BP, large multinational oil company, for the small people, the little people. Well, the small people and the little people. This is pure oligarchical thinking. This is what oligarchs think Republicans, Democrats, this makes no difference. They are oligarchs, first, last, and always. And this is what has to be fought. And then, of course, Tony Hayward, arrogant, incompetent, duplicitous, mendacious, evasive. And in the course of these hearings, if you had a chance to listen to them, you will have heard that over the recent years, the safety violations at BP installations were hundreds of times greater than those of other oil companies. Repeatedly, that BP had 700, 800 violations when the others would be in the teens or at most in the 20s. We also heard, and this is probably self-serving, but it probably also has a grain of truth, right? We heard the testimony of Exxon, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, Shell, all saying that they don't do it the way BP does. They provide the full array, the full panoply of safety devices on their oil wells. And the irony now is that we have Tony Hayward, who is a finance oligarch, sitting up there and saying under his leadership, BP has profoundly changed its corporate culture. There was a discussion of the report led by former Secretary of State James Baker III. Remember, Bush's right-hand man, the guy who actually ran the Reagan White House most of the time, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of State, and on and on. Baker had been the head of a commission to investigate that Texas City oil refinery explosion, and they found that the corporate culture of BP was absolutely predatory, absolutely antithetical to the public interest. Now, time to do something about it. We saw the impotence and the pathos of Obama, this play actor, someone who believes that the function of the president is to deliver speeches, right? Words, verbiage, and on and on and on. Obama's first effort at an Oval Office emergency address to the nation was simply pathetic. It contained no concrete elements, except perhaps for the idea of getting $20 billion into an escrow fund, taking it out of the hands of BP. This is simply too little, too late. And it also it exemplifies a method which, if that's all you do, will lead to the destruction of BP in North America. And again, this is not desirable. The thing has to be reformed, but the jobs must be kept. Economic activity must be restored. And above all, the building assault of green fanatics, Malthusian lunatics, who would like to shut down all oil drilling and probably all oil production in the United States must be countered. The appropriate way to do this, to preserve BP, but to preserve the productive capability, not the ownership, because they would be gone. Hayward would be gone. The arrogant Swedish chairman who is sympathetic to the little people, they would all be gone. They would presumably carry on in London. But the entire U.S. and or North American operations would be nationalized and probably run on a relatively permanent basis, the beginning of a state sector. Why not? We've always needed one. That this allows the productive capability to be preserved, it allows the liabilities to be paid over time, and it allows the rational further development of this industry. Notice, the culprit here is deregulation, the litany of the Austrian school and the Chicago school. This is what Republican administrations have been doing ever since the advent of stupid Reagan, with his litany. Government is never the solution. Government is the problem. Well, that's just too simplistic, Ron. That won't cut the mustard. Now we see where this leads. And this has been an education for the American people. I hope the first installment of the necessary Pekora hearing shock leading to nationalize this bandit enterprise and make it a public asset. We'll be back in a minute on World Crisis Radio.